Welcome back for the third and final installment of replacing the front wheel bearing on a 2004 Infiniti G35X. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and get the knuckle back on the car. And how I'm going to do that, I'm going to put everything in loosely first, all the bolts in first, and then we'll tighten everything up after we get everything situated here. So I'm going to start first of all with the upper control arm. And I'll put the compression rod in next, down here. And I think I'm going to go compression rod first, and then I'll put the axle in after that. Alright, so now I've got the upper control arm and the compression rod nuts on. What I'm going to do is take the upper control arm nut off, pull this back a little bit so I can slide the axle in. Put the upper control arm back on, and then what I'm going to do now is put in the lower link here. So that nut's on kind of loosely there. Alright, so the steering link's going to go on now, and there's a washer and a nut for that. Swivel that out a little bit. Alright, so we've got everything kind of loosely tightened here. What we're going to do now is torque everything down. Alright, so the torque spec on the upper control arm nut is 40 to 46 foot-pounds and requires a 17 millimeter socket. Alright, as far as cotter pins goes, it looks like the 3/32 cotter pin is going to fit the best here. So I'm going to put that in here through the back. Make sure it's push it up against there. And then I'll grab my pliers here. Alright, so the top one's done. So I'm just going to repeat that process for the lower link, the compression rod, and the steering link over here. The spec is 56 to 59 foot-pounds for the lower link, 56 to 59 foot-pounds for the compression rod, and 22 to 28 foot-pounds for the tie rod or the steering link. The cotter pin sizes that I used were 1/8 of an inch. Those seem to work the best. One thing with regard to putting on the cotter pins, it actually works better just to use vice grips because you can get a better hold on it and then pull the tails of the cotter pin around the nut. Alright, so we can put the rotor on now. Let's go ahead and put that on here. And again, anti-seize if you like, and maybe even clean up the back of the rotor before you put it on. I'm going to put a couple nuts on here too to hold this on. Okay, so we're going to put the brake caliper bracket on. And at this point you might want to clean up the hardware also. I like to do that whenever I'm doing this kind of work, just to make sure that the brake pads slide correctly along the hardware here, so that's up to you. I usually just take a metal brush and just clean these up. And then I put some anti-seize on, or not anti-seize, I actually use a silicone paste on here on the ears just to clean this up and make sure it slides nicely. So remember, there's a washer here. That washer goes on top like this. I know some cars they have spacers, which is kind of weird, but this one actually the washers go on right under the bolt. So to tighten the brake caliper bracket bolts, it requires a 22mm socket, and the torque spec is 113 foot-pounds, so pretty stout amount of torque there. Alright, so I'm ready to put the brake pads back in. I've cleaned up the ends here using this brass brush. And I've got the silicone paste, 3M. This is what Eric the car guy uses, so I decided to follow what he does. So what I usually do is just put it on the ears of the brake pads. I don't like to put it on the hardware just because I'm always afraid I'm going to get it on the rotor. Alright, so here's that flat stock that I had that I was using on the press. I'm going to use that to press in the piston here. I've got this tool here. And also make sure you check that your brake fluid reservoir is not going to overflow, so you might want to pop your hood and take a look at that while you're doing this. But I already checked that, so I'm in good shape here. It's not going very far anyway. Alright, should fit just fine now. And you may want to grease your caliper slides at this point too. I'm not going to do that here. I've already checked to make sure that they are greased appropriately. Okay, so the torque spec is 20 foot-pounds on these two bolts here. I've got the 3/8 inch torque wrench. It's like, because I have a lot more reach with this than I do with the 1/2 inch. Okay. Now, this bracket up here, I'm not sure exactly what the torque spec is on this bracket, on these two bolts up here, right up there. So it's not, there's no structural implications with these two bolts, so I'm just going to tighten them down just so they're snug and nice and tight. Alright, so I'm going to put this bracket back over here on the side where the tie rod is. Okay, so this is a 14mm. So I'm going to tighten to about 45. Okay, so I need to put the wheel sensor back in. If the silicone in here is damaged, you might want to clean that up and then put a little bit of silicone around this here. Make sure you stay off the sensor though. But this one looks like it's in pretty good shape, so I'm just going to put it right back in. And then our bolt here. Okay, so the wheel sensor bolt is 12mm and it's a whopping 11 foot-pounds. So we'll go ahead and tighten that down. Alright, so we'll just kind of double check everything, make sure everything's tightened and all the connectors are where they go. This one looks like it's loose back here. Alright, so I've got the screwdriver position here, and then I've got my torque wrench and a 32mm socket. Torque spec is 174 to 231. Now I just tightened this off camera, so this is all nice and tight. But that's a way you can do it with the car in the air. Alright, so then there's a cotter pin. I got a new one. You can use the old one if you want to. I don't like reusing cotter pins, but this is the biggest one I could find. It's still not the same size as the old one. So that's up to you, but I'd rather not reuse the old cotter pin. And that's all there is to changing the front wheel bearing on a 2004 Infiniti G35X.